computer. Okay, welcome everybody after our break, which actually is very nice that we had our break and now we can start a whole new topic, which is Basar B'chalav.
I have only one little thing to say.
Yeah.
That is, I advise everyone that when it sounds like the material we did earlier, look it up and compare. No, it's very helpful.
Right. There are various places where we return to the same Gemara and we learn a different thing from it, or we even learn the same thing again. So we'll see that. So yes, I hope this is as sweet as milk and honey, this topic. All right, so I'm going to actually start. Andre couldn't be here, so I prepared a little slide. Just let me share my screen. And there we go. Okay, so everyone sees my screen? Yeah. Okay. So milk and meat, Siman 86. So first thing I did is I collected the psukim. So here are our sources. It says, Reshit b'kurei admatcha tavi beit Hashem Elokecha lo tibashel gedi b'chalev imo.
Well done.
And that is said actually twice. The exact same line apparently is in Shmot and in what did I write here? I think this is Devarim.
No, it's Shmot both times. It's
Shmot both times. Yeah. Yeah. There we go. It's in Shmot both times. One in 20 yeah, exactly. Two places in Shmot, and then in Devarim. Here's the Devarim. Lo tochlu kol nevelav lager asher b'sharecha titnu ve'achalu o machor lenochri ki am kadosh ata la'Hashem Elokecha lo tivashel gedi b'chalev imo. So we have three psukim that says do not cook a kid in his mother's milk. Here it talks about am kadosh. Also it says lo tochlu kol nevela. That's going to be a relevant thing later. Actually, you see a drasha that compares nevela, the Mishnah, that compares the nevela to the gedi. But here you just notice that in the same breath we're talking about don't eat a nevela, and don't cook a kid in its mother's milk. I have this thought that mitzvot can also be understood as like I'm learning Mishlei, and Mishlei is advice, and I'm looking at mitzvot as advice. Not that we don't have to do it, but maybe it is advice. You know, it's not a good idea to cook a kid in his mother's milk, maybe because it's wasteful. Like the milk, you should use the milk as milk, and you cook meat in water if you want to cook it. And you don't need to put it in milk. It's like waste, just like wasteful. It's like totally nobody ever looks at it that way. Everyone looks at it as like a spiritual thing, mixing forces of life. Rav Chaim Lopez Cardozo has a whole thing about how it's adding. Rav Nassim Lopez Cardozo, he says, putting life and extra life together. It's like too much life, and therefore it's dangerous. It's like alchemy. Okay, those are our three psukim. Now, I had three drashot on the thrice repeated prohibition. I collected these because it's very, there's several places where there's a drasha brought from the fact that it says three times. The Mishnah that we're very familiar with is in Chulin, Kuf Yud Gimel, and that I'm just quoting part of it. Rabbi Akiva Omer Shosha Pamim Prat L'Chayev L'Of L'Behema Tameya. So it says it three times to tell you, do not include a wild animal, a chicken, or a domestic animal. And then in Chulin, it says, this is the really difficult one because he brings so many drashot here. So look at this. Amr Shmuel, Gedi L'Rabot Et HaChelev, Gedi L'Rabot Et HaMeta. So whether it's fat or dead, Gedi L'Rabot Et HaShlil. all of those are included in the prohibition of the. Here was an exclusion. Here's an inclusion. Then he says, "Gedi lahotziat dam," but remove the dam. Gedi lahotziat shalya, ugedi lahotziat tme'ah. Now, what's the difference between shalya and shlil?
The shalil is the fetus and the shalia is the placenta, yes?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's right. That's what I recall. Yes. So we are we're including the fetus, but not including the placenta. So these things are like, what are these? Dam, blood, and lotziata tame'ah means a behemoth tame'ah. In other words, a non-kosher species. So like a pig would not be included in the prohibition, which you don't see here. Well, he has behemoth tame'ah, actually. So he actually does have behemoth tame'ah. So I don't know what Shmuel is saying, but he's getting more things. And then he says, B'chalevi mo, why does it say in the milk of its mother? Lo b'chalev zachar, not in male-generated milk, which maybe is possible. B'chalev imo v'lo b'chalev shchuta, not in a already shechted animal. B'chalev imo lo b'chalev tme'ah. And then it says, Ahat plat gedi ketiv va'anan shita drashinan. And the Gemara says, what do you have 3 times it says the word gedi, and you're actually trying to get 6 drushes out of it, or depending how you look at it, 9 maybe. But the Gemara gives an answer, but not important to me. But I just want to point out all the drushot that are going on here. And then in Chulin, this actually becomes the one that the Tur and the Shulchan Aruch bring. So this one actually is the most important one. But I think it's most important. I was thinking about why this is the most important. Why is this one brought in the Shulchan Aruch and not this one? This one, the Rabbi Akiva one, is a really nice one. And the halach is like Rabbi Akiva. But this one is actually brought twice. It's brought in Kedushin also. And, well, I was thinking because it's not disputed, there's no dispute about this drasha. It's just brought. And it's brought in a nameless way. So it's apparently everybody agrees to it. So maybe that's why, but I'm not sure. But anyway, it's certainly a useful drasha. Here, let's see what it is. Tana lo tivashel gedi b'chalev imo. Don't cook a kid in his mother's milk. Gimel pamim. Why? It says it gimel pamim. Why? Echad le'isur achila. This is going to be our main interest. One is for prohibiting eating. Echad le'isur hana'a. One is to prohibit deriving benefit from it. Ve'echad le'isur bishul. And one to prohibit you from cooking it even if you don't derive benefit from it. Theoretically, you could cook it and not for any benefit. I don't know, throw it away. But just the act of cooking it is asur. Okay, so those are our drashot. Now we want to discuss the extent of the isur, which is, what does it apply to? Because it obviously applies to bishul, but what's included in bishul? We learned before that many things are like bishul. We've learned already that kibush is kamavushal, and we've learned like pickling is like cooking, and also we're going to talk about roasting. Roasting is a kind of cooking. Is bishul exclusively boiling, or is bishul cooking? So actually, we have a very clear Gemara in Psachim, Memdal. It says like this: Rabbi Akiva tam ke'ikr menadle. This is a discussion of tam ke'ikr, right? I think we saw this Gemara before. Rabbi Akiva discusses tam ke'ikr, which means that flavor can cause an isser, even if the actual isser substance isn't there. It can prohibit other food just by its flavor. So how does he learn it? Yalef mi basar b'chalav. Let him learn it from basar b'chalav. Why? How could he learn it from basar b'chalav? Because lav time ba'alma hu basar. Isn't it merely tam? I'm translating ba'alma as merely. Isn't it merely tam? In other words, the milk just put some flavor into the meat, and now the meat's aser. So you see tam ke'ikr. Achanami loshna, and just so too every other isser could be the same. That could be a great source, Tom, right? Why don't we learn that if the Torah prohibits cooking milk and meat, then every time you have a flavor going into something that's aser, it's going to prohibit it. Just like the flavor of milk going into meat is going to prohibit it. Right? You pick up the meat, there's no milk there. and the meat is usher because it has flavor in it. So then he says, then that's where that's in other words, that's his drasha. The Rabbanan, but rather rabbis do not hold this drasha. So Rabbanan, B'basar b'chalav lo gamrinan, the chidushu. So the Rabbanan say you can't learn from basar b'chalav because it's a chiddush. We've seen this idea before. It's a unique law. Something about basar b'chalav is unique. Well, we're going to investigate what? My chiddush. What is unique about it? If you say because each of them on their own is permitted, but when they put them together, they all of a sudden become asur. That's like weird. The two permitted things put them together should be even more permitted. No, that's not so unusual. Kilayim nami. We have a din of kilayim that you mix different things that are permitted, and it becomes asur. Hai l'chudya v'hai l'chudya shari. Each one on its own is permitted. Ubahadadi asur, and they're prohibited. So therefore, that's not a proper chiddush. Ella. So what does the Gemara say? What is the unique thing about basar b'chalav that makes the rabbis not be able to learn tam ki'ikr from basar b'chalav because it's so unique? So we say ela de'i tarule kuleyama b'chal shari. If you let it sit all day in milk, it's permitted on the Torah level. From the Torah, it would be permitted to eat that meat, even though it sat all day in milk. Bashile, bashule, but if you cooked it, then it would be asur. So you see from this chiddush that it's unusual. It's all dafka bishul, derech bishul asur Torah. Only bishul, and not pickling. So it sounds like pickling is not forbidden, at least on a Torah level. So that's pretty much agreed upon because that's a pretty straightforward Gemara. Now we have a complicated question about sli. Extent of the Isser. Is sli roasting forbidden? So now here is, we have to go back to that case that we learned before of tipat chalav. So tipat chalav, which is in Chulin, the ran is a very long ran, which actually we looked at a little bit last time, actually. Mem Gimel, very important ran. Complicated. He asks, what does this teach us, this tipat chalav? What are we actually learning for this tipat chalav? We already know, like, of the idea of chanan. What is it teaching us? So here's what he says it's teaching us. He says, in roasting, we have a din, only klipa is forbidden. So we learned that in Siman Kuf Hey, Sif Dal. That roasting is only going to create a klipa of prohibition. Now you might think in the case of, and you might think so too, in the case of tipat chalav, because if you think about it, it's actually like roasting. What happened? Think of it like in Tosfos' way of explaining it, that a drop of milk hit a piece of meat that was outside of the broth in the pot. So it's a dry, in other words, that piece of meat is just essentially roasting there, and your one drop of milk is not turning into boiling. It's just going to add some flavor to it, but it's not changing the nature of the cooking. It's still essentially roasting. So you might think that it would only be klipa here, just like roasting. So this comes to teach us that because of the steam, and here's the chiddush of the ran here. He says the steam that's in the pot, it causes the drop to penetrate the whole piece, and it's sort of like boiling, even though it's outside of the broth. So we get this kind of quasi state where it's not roasting, it's in a steam bath. And steam bath means that an interesting thing happens, that the flavors penetrate the whole thing, but don't go into the neighbor. And that's what that Gemara is teaching, that it doesn't go into the neighbor, right? The other pieces that it's resting on do not become asur. Only the one piece becomes asur, because it's in a steam bath. But it should have been really just a klipa, we would have thought, because it's not boiling. By the way, I think that this sort of gets at that big machloket between Rashi and Tosfos of whether the piece is submerged or not submerged. And I think that is the fulcrum of the question, which is, is it above or below the water line? Why is that? why are they worried about that? And I think it relates to this question that if it's in the water, then it should be the whole pot. And if it's above the water, then it should be just klipa. So each one has an argument why it can't, the other one's wrong. Now that's what Rashi is saying. Rashi says it has to be this kind of this intermediate stage where it's like out of the water and in the water. Because if we fully out of the water, maybe Rashi would say not like they're on. That in that case, it would only be klipa. Maybe that's what Rashi is saying. So that's why he rejects Tosfos' opinion. And I'm proposing. And when it's right, and therefore he says it's like semi in the water, and therefore it's only in the pot. And Tosfos puts it fully out of the pot because otherwise there's a whole pot. Otherwise, all the meat in the pot should join together against the drop. And he lays himself open, vulnerable to the attack. But then why shouldn't it be klipa? And that's what the Rad says. Because of the steam. Tosfos doesn't say it. I think that's kind of the basis of their argument. Sort of have a catch-22. We're having this quasi-state where it's not klipa, and it's also not the whole pot. So that's what the Ran says. Then the Ran continues that the normal roasting, the din is klipa, and not chanan. Obviously, that's what we say. So this can only mean that roasting with milk is not a Torah prohibition, because it would get it, because chanan is the din of the Torah. The Torah's din of milk and meat is that there's chanan. There's no, it even says in these words, there's no such thing as klipa by milk and meat from the Torah. From the Torah level, it's either bishul or it's not bishul. If it's bishul, then it's not klipa, it's the whole thing. So you see that the Ran is clearly saying that roasting is not bishul. Because if it would be bishul, then it would be the whole thing. He's saying the whole idea of klipa means that it can't be a Torah law. So the Ran clearly holds that bishul, that roasting is not bishul, and therefore we only asur d'Rabbanan roasting. So there's a Tosfos in Sanhedrin 4b, which seems to hold, well, it's not clear how it holds in my opinion, but the Chavot Dat understands that he holds that actually, whatever, that he holds like the Ran. I think he holds that roasting is called bishul. In any case, there is an opinion that roasting is bishul. The Pri Chadash brings two psukim for it. In Divrei, it's funny, he goes all the way to Divrei Yamim. I noticed also that the Chabotat brings Divrei Yamim. It's sort of funny because there's a pasuk in Dvarim that says Bishalta v'achalta. Now the Pri Chadash brings both. It says by the Pesach, it says Bishalta v'achalta. Now we know it's usher to boil the Pesach. So how come it says achalta b'shalta v'achalta? And also in Divrei Yamim it says v'yivashlu ha'pesach ba'esh. You boil it in fire. It's kind of weird. So obviously the word boiling can refer to roasting. So because obviously you're roasting it, and also this very weird language. You vashlu as the Pesach. Of course. Okay, so that's the verses that would indicate that roasting is prohibited from the Torah. So the Chabotat and the Yalkut Yosef, based on a Meiri, also quotes a Meiri that clearly says that the roasting is rabbinic. And in other words, so they hold that roasting is rabbinic, and therefore you would be permitted to, let's say, roast some kind of milk and meat for a Gentile, because anything that is only prohibited to Rabbanan is not asur b'hana'ah. So it's only asur in eating it. So roasting is rabbinically prohibited, so you could actually do it, says the at least, obviously you shouldn't do that, but if you needed to. In other words, roasting meat that was roasted with milk is prohibited to eat rabbinically. To actually cook it wouldn't even be prohibited rabbinically. Despite these psukim, which seem to say, now we can answer, well, these psukim, Bishlato is a Pesach, I don't know why it doesn't say et. I would like it to be et. I guess this was, Ben Gurion didn't like the word et, so I guess Divrei Yamim follows Ben Gurion. Vivashlu ha-Pesach ba'esh. So I think you have to say that the word bishul can either mean a general term or a specific term. In other words, here it means cook it in fire, and here it also means cook it and eat it. Bishalta v'achalta. In certain cases, when it's contrasted with sli, then it means boiling. And maybe by the and when you have the pasuk by the Gedi, where it's clearly in milk, so there it means boiling, because it's a case where boiling. Torah could have told you, don't cook it, or roast. It could have said, don't roast it. It wouldn't normally roast it in meat. Anyway, so basically it comes out that roasting is forbidden rabbinically. Now, wait a second. So the Ran al Harif, I brought you now just the quotations. I took out a few places of the Ran that I brought this halacha from, but I'll skip it because we don't have time really. But here you just see, he says, I'll just read a little bit here. He says, Lama why doesn't it forbid the shniya, but the shlishit, bekan la'olam? Why is the klipa? Why did it stop at klipa? Why isn't it chanan, essentially? Essentially saying, it should be chanan. And he brings the idea that a mochel shel haheter hayotze me'oto klipa eno oser samuchlo. Because it's not bishul, so whatever comes out of that one klipa doesn't prohibit the next klipa. We know this. We know this is in a different term in Hebrew. Hiran doesn't use, but we know the term something like efo sheha oser eno yachol lagia gam hane'asar eno yachol lagia. I don't remember the exact lashon, but in other words, the oser can't get there. Since the tipa can't get there, the drop can't get there, then the ne'asar, even though it could maybe get there, the thing that got prohibited by the tipa could maybe get there, but we say it doesn't get there either. We're not going to make the ne'asar worse than the oser. So anyway, that's the Ran. It's just parts of the Ran that sort of show what I was saying before. Okay, now the extent of the Isser. Now we have a third question. Is frying also forbidden? So we have this discussion in the Gemara and Sanhedrin about aim l'mikrava, aim l'masar, which is an interesting discussion. You should all look into it. It's just a question of whether we can, everybody agrees that we can darshan the mikra. When it says mikra, what it means is, we used to think of mikra as the pasuk, but mikra means the kriya, the way you read the pasuk. Is that what we darshan on the way you read the pasuk, or do we darshan on the Masorah? Masorah meaning the letters. Can we darshan, as if it's a Kri Ketiv, everybody agrees that we darshan on the way you say it, but can you also darshan on the way you read it, the letters, the way it's printed? So how are we to understand the word chaylev? Maybe it means, there's chalav, maybe it means chaylev. So Amar Rav Acha Berei de Rav Ika Amar Kra Lo Tevashel Gadi. So how do we know that it's not chaylev? Because it's and it is milk, it is chalav, because it says Lo Tevashel Gadi. Lo Tevashel Gadi. So it's something that you boil. Derech Bishul Asra Torah. So Rashi says, Derech Bishul, Chalav Salul Kamayim. The milk is clear like water, the Ikabishul, and therefore it's called Bishul. Aval Chelev Eino Bishul Elatigun. You don't call boiling in fat boiling, you call it tigun. We have a different word. So if it says lo tivashel in the pasuk, it must be talking about not frying. I'll say it like that. It must be talking about not frying. And that's what the fact that the Minchat Yaakov says. He's brought by, I didn't find the Minchat Yaakov myself. He's brought in the Prima Gadim in Mishpasot Zahav Aleph. The Pri Chadash argues on him. He says Rashi only means that the Torah should have used the word tagen if it meant fat, but once it means milk and it uses the word bishul, then the word could now include all kinds of cooking. So he holds actually the Pri Chadash that frying meat in butter would be prohibited according to the Torah. But the Minchas Yaakov would say, no, frying meat in butter would be not prohibited from the Torah. That's not cooking. Now, the Pri Megadim brings the Pri Chadash and the Minchas Yaakov and paskins to be lenient in Hefsed Meruba. It's kind of shocking, that it's saying like if you fried a lot of stuff in butters, and you could somehow eat it now. Or at least it would be, I don't know, or maybe you wouldn't be able to eat it. Maybe you'd only be able to. Not sure what he means by it's mutter paskins to be lenient. Maybe only that you could do the cooking. You could sell it. Yeah, you couldn't eat it. You could sell it, right? You could have hana'ah from it. Exactly. You couldn't eat it. Got a little too carried away. couldn't eat it. Okay. What about a microwave? So on Shabbat, a microwave is considered cooking, right? It's not frying. It's not boiling. It's not roasting. It's microwaving. There's no water. There's no oil. There's no fire. It's internally cooking. So on Shabbat, it's considered cooking and forbidden because it's a normal way to cook. And in the laws of Shabbos, we're mostly concerned with the final product. Now, did you create a cooked thing? Which a very learned man who recently died at the age of like 96 told me many times, he was very medactic in words. And he said, malacha is not a verb, it's a noun. He says, what you're prohibited to do on Shabbat is to create a malacha, to create a thing that is a result of omanut, of specified labors. So here you're creating a result, a cooked food. This also explains how roasting can be forbidden on Shabbat, obviously, but permitted regarding milk and meat. But regarding milk and meat, the Torah is not referring to this kind of cooking, obviously. Bishul is for sure not referring to microwave. So therefore, you could microwave for your Gentile friend something that you would have to check the ingredients if there's milk and meat in it, if your friend asks you to microwave something for him, right? If your friend's coming over and he wants you to microwave something that's not kosher, you normally would have to check the ingredients, make sure there's no milk and meat in there before you cook it. But no, if it's a microwave, it's not cooking. What about hana'ah? Just checking. Yeah, okay. What about hana'ah, deriving benefit? So it's usher even if not derech hana'ah. For example, forbidden to benefit intravenously, right? You couldn't have like some kind of milk and meat food given to you intravenously. Even though that's not derech hana'ah. So asur, but it's still asur. We learn this because it is written lo tivashel, and is not written lo tochal. The Torah, we famous thing, hotzi isur achila b'lashon bishul. So that means that it's not only normal eating; it's any kind of eating. And now here is this is what we started with, kind of. This is what we started with. This is the Mishnah in chapter 8 of Hulin, daf 113. Basar behema tahora, bechalav behema tahora. So, basar behema tahora and two tahora things. So it's asur lebashil, asur bahana. Basar behema tahora, bechalav behema tameya. Basar behema tameya, bechalav behema tahora, or the reverse. Mutter lebashil, mutter bahana. So here you see clearly it's mutter bahana and mutter bishul, because you're not doing the actual prohibition, because it's not, one of them is a tamei animal or tamei milk. So then it's only rabbinic. So then the rabbinic, that's the basic principle. Then the rabbinic does not include bishul and hana'ah. Now, Rabbi Akiva Omer chaya va'of eina min haTorah shene'amar lo tevashel gedi b'chalev imogim pa'amim prat l'chaya v'la'of v'la'behem v'dameim. That's what we saw before. So that the three there's, well, what are these special animals? The chaya is not a behema. An oaf, doesn't have milk, and a behema tameya well, it doesn't have, it's not kosher, so it's not included in the prohibition. It's already prohibited, right? It's already prohibited. If you think about it, what these categories are, a chaya is something that's not a behemoth, and you don't milk wild animals because they're wild. You don't have them in your field. You don't have them herded to milk them. So it's not an animal that would be potentially that you could have the milk of it. An oaf doesn't even have milk, and a behemoth tamea you wouldn't need a prohibition for because you can't eat it anyway. So it's very logical that these three are being excluded. Rabbi Yossi Aglila goes one step. Well, he says he actually is more machmir. He says in a certain way, Omer Ne'emar lo tochlu kol nevela. That was the beginning of the pasuk that we saw. Remember, that was the beginning. Lo tochlu kol nevela. The Ne'emar lo tevashel gedi b'chadei bimo, and it also says don't cook in the same pasuk. Et shasur mishum nevela asur mishum asur levashel b'chalav. Only those things that have a prohibition of nevela and therefore not a behemoth tameya. But yes, a chayav, yes, a oaf. Right? A chayav, a oaf, our behemoth can have nevela. So only those ones would be asur. And then he goes further and he says, oaf, shasur, mishum nevela asur levashel b'chalav. Of asur mishum nevela. So of you might think it's also asur, like I just said. Yachol ye asur levashel b'chalav because it is nevela. Talmud lover b'chalav imo yotze of she'en lo chalav im ein. It doesn't have milk, so he ends up including only the chaya because the chaya is nevela and it does have milk. So he's different from Rabbi Akiva. He's more machmir, but we'll see in a minute that he's actually more mekel. Because in another aspect, but just 1 second, which is that notice that he doesn't need the 3 times. So he's got the 3 times to learn other things out, which is hana'ah, achila, and bishul. He has that free, and Rabbi Akiva sort of doesn't really because he used it up. So maybe we're actually passing. We passing like Rabbi Akiva, but almost sounds like we're passing like Rabbi Yossi Glili. But Rabbi Yossi Glili, well. The dat Rabbi, so what is this? Perish HaRambam. So the Rambam says like this: Dat Rabbi Akiva shechayev of asur lochlan b'chalav midrabanan. He holds that it's asur d'Rabbanan to eat them. Umuter levashel, but it's muter levashel lefi shelo asar katuv ela bishul behema tahora b'chalav behema tahora. So in other words, well, the Torah also didn't prohibit. It's a little bit weird what the Rambam is saying because what do you mean? Because the Torah didn't prohibit. The Torah also didn't prohibit the eating of oaf and chicken. So what does he mean? Lefi shelo asra katuv ela bishul behema doesn't quite make sense. The Rambam here. I don't know. Anybody have an explanation? Anyone can help me on that? In other words, it should say lefi. What do you mean? Lefi shelo asar katuv ela bishul behema tahora. B'chalav behema tahora. So therefore, the rabbis didn't prohibit isser of bishul, but they did prohibit isser of eating. Okay, it doesn't quite fit. And then the question is, what about hana'ah? So most people understand this Rambam to mean when he says mutar b'bishul, he means and hana'ah because they go together. Although he doesn't say it. Honestly saying, he doesn't say it. But everybody understands it means also hana'ah is mutar. Now, is a Gemara in Shabbos 130a that says b'makomo shel Rabbi Yossi Haglili hayu ochlim basar va'of b'chalav. And that's a very important Gemara because it shows you that in this way he's more mekel than Rabbi Akiva. That he actually allowed people to eat it. Not just say it's prohibited. Notice here we just said that it's asur d'Rabbanan. Asur d'Rabbanan according to Rabbi Akiva, and that's the way we passed it. But Rabbi Yossi Glili said it's even mutar d'Rabbanan. Okay, the halacha. So the halacha is like Rabbi Akiva, you can't eat chicken and milk. The Ramah permits hana'ah in rabbinic isurim. So the Ramah permits hana'ah in rabbinic isurim. he understands the Rambam to permit cooking and deriving benefit. That's where he gets it from. He quotes in parentheses in the Ramah, it says Rambam. And that's what he's talking about. The Bach forbids. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Rav Nachum, we lost. At least I lost you there for a minute. I don't know if everybody else did.
Well, I just was saying that the Ramah paskins based on that Rambam that Hana'ah and rabbinic prohibitions is mutter. The Bach, on the other hand, forbids this. In support, he cites the following Gemara, which we maybe remember from Chulin. It says, Rav Ashi Amar. Well, this right. This is a problematic Mishnah over there because and Rav Ashi comes to finally explain the Mishnah, and he says, "This is Amar Kulhu Rabbi Akiva." He says the Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva. Vahachi ka Amar. And this is what the Mishnah says. Kol habas, because it says kol habasar. Over there, the Mishnah, I didn't bring in the Mishnah, but the Mishnah says kol habasar is asur b'chalav chutz mi dagim v'chagavim. Well, just except for fish and locusts or whatever. Yeah. And why? What about chicken? What about the chicken? Chicken should also be permitted, at least from the Torah. So he says like this. Everything is asur to cook. B'chalav. Mehen midivrei Torah, umehen midivrei sofrim. Some of them because of the Torah, and some of them because of the sofrim. Chutz mibasar dagim v'chagavim. She'enam lo midivrei Torah v'lo midivrei sofrim. That those are totally permitted. So you see from this that there's an Issur Rabbanan to cook chicken and milk. Not like the Ramah. Bach has a very good proof. Bach is very smart. But the halacha is like the Ramah. The halacha doesn't always go with the smartest. I don't know. The Ramah, I'm sure, has an answer. But that's, sure the Ramah has a great answer, but that's the Bach has a very nice. No, I mean, we can give a simple answer that this is just Rav Ashi explaining the Mishnah according to Rabbi Akiva and Lav Dafka. In other words, it's not necessarily the way the Mishnah, what Mishnah means, but Rabbi Akiva could explain it like this. And therefore, it's not necessarily proof. Okay, I didn't have time. I don't know if what do you think? Should we look at the actual Shulchan Aruch? Or should, I basically covered everything that's in the Shulchan Aruch in the first sif. I'll just read it quickly, and I don't want to take too much time. I already took too much time. Sadi Pei Zayin, Shulchan Aruch. So you'll see that we have exactly what you just said. It says, Katuv b'Torah lo tevashel gedi b'chalev imo, shlosha pamim, echad le'isur bishul, ve'echad le'isur achila, ve'echad le'isur hana'ah. V'hotzi achila b'lashon bishul, omar, she'eno osir min ha'Torah, ele derech bishul. Aval midrabanan, asur b'kol inyan. So that, the kol inyan, that it's asur midrabanan, so that's going on, what kol inyan? Roasting, frying, all those are drabanan. B'kol basar b'chalav, the Ramah says, she'eno asur min haTorah muter b'hana'ah. He doesn't bring the Rambam there, but I think he's basing on the Rambam. Siman bet, sif bet, gedi lav dafka, the huadin shor seb eis, all other behemoth. V'lo shna b'chalav aim, v'lo shna b'chalav acheret, ela shediberet Torah a katuv behoved. It doesn't have to be Dafka his mother. It could be any animal, any milk from any animal, as long as it was a behemoth. All right, that's what I got. It was very short, 2 sifim, but there's a lot of the interesting sources there. Okay, let me stop my share. And Noam.
Okay. How long do you want me to go?
What are my options?
Like I can go the full expanded version, but I've got other people to go as well. So
You certainly can have 20 minutes.
All right, I think I can do 20 minutes. All right, so I'm going to share my screen as well. I'm also going to drop something in the chat if people prefer to look at that way. Mine is not as glorious as a slideshow. It's just a Daf Makarot, most of which are, by the way, just in your standard volume of the Torah in Shulchan Aruch, but this is mostly for my prep than your prep. So we'll go off my sheet. I did include some other things as well. So I'm going to share my screen. Excellent. Everyone can see this?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so this is the Mishnah that Rav Nachum just taught us. So we're not gonna go over it so much right now. But let me zoom in for all you. It teaches this whole notion about what do we do with behema meat that is tmeah? Does it have the same status of Torah meat? And we already see in the Torah right here of a basar Tehora bechalav behemat tmeah, o basar tmeah bechalav Torah, ubasar chayav of afilu bechalav Torah, eno ela midrabanan umutar b'vishul v'hanaa. So this, in some ways, sums up nicely much of what Rav Nachum just presented. That from a Torah level, we're only concerned, first of all, with basar behema, with basar behema Torah and chalav Torah. And then the question is, what's the next level down? So from an eating perspective, it's all still out. Even if you're mixing, matching Tmeah and Tehora or Oath and Tmeah, that is all out. But according to the Torah, the way it works is that when it's Behema milk, it's with Tehora milk or Tmeah meat, or Tmeah meat and Tehora milk. I've gotten that wrong. Whatever, both versions. That is mutar, bibishul, and v'hanaa. And the same thing is with oaf, and that including if it's Tehora. So again, rabbinic things you are allowed to benefit from, and you are allowed to cook. Torah things you are not even allowed. You're not allowed to do those things either. So the Beit Yosef does a very close reading of the Torah. And we're not going to read the Beit Yosef here in depth, but just to recount sort of what he says is based on the Torah's reading, it seems that he's sort of looping in the laws of the Chaya, the Oath, and the Behemah in the same rules. Meaning to say that, oh, they all have the same deen, which functionally they do have the same deen from a halacha l'maaseh perspective, meaning you're not allowed to eat a basar behemat tmeah the same way that you're not allowed to eat oaf bechalav. But the important thing is whether there is an isor of basar bechalav on it. So what the Beit Yosef points out is that in the case of a behemat tmeah or with a behemat tmeah with chalav Torah, or behemat Torah with, or chalav Torah or behemat tmeah, there's actually no isor of basar b'chalav because there'd be no point. Meaning it's already tmeah. Like why do you need to create an isor of achila on that? Where you do need to say that explicitly with the case of Oaf and Chaya, because from the Torah's perspective, there's no Isur on that. And what the Beit Yosef is pointing out is that if you're looking just at the Torah's language, you might get confused. And this sort of gets codified in Pei Zayin Gimel of the Shulchan Aruch, where he says, so it only applies to when both the meat and the milk are kosher from a behema. But when either the milk or the meat is non-kosher and the other one is kosher, then they're permitted for bishul and hana'ah. And notice how he sort of has a full stop there, meaning he separates out what the Torah collapsed. He says, all right, this is the deen of the behema on one side, and now he's going to go to the chaya and the oaf. Uvatar chaya v'of afilu b'chalav Torah, utar b'bishul of hana'ah. But with a chaya and oaf, they even when you're mixing them, cooking them with chalav Torah, with kosher milk, then it's permitted to to cook with them and get benefit from them, but only their achila is asor midrabanan. And again, the distinction here is whether there is a din of basar b'chalav. According to the Shulchan Aruch, there's no din of basar b'chalav on the behema Torah with the chalav temeah, but there is with the oaf and the chaya. And again, this is the rabbinic basar b'chalav. There's, as we learned, there's no Torah basar b'chalav with oaf and chaya. So the Shach sort of reviews all of this. He points out that the Beit Yosef did a good job. Lakach tiken kan halashon v'yafeh kivan. Right, the Beit Yosef did a good job. He corrected the language of the Torah, and then he brings the Bach, who disagrees with the Beit Yosef and says actually the Torah got it right. And the reason that's important is if, like, at the end of the day, like, it's forbidden, like, why do we care? The Bach does point out a nafkamina, and he says, "V'nafkamina linyan chaticha nasa nevela, the sphere le de'eno ela basar b'chalav." Right? If you hold chanan only for basar b'chalav, there actually is a nafkamina, because if you're saying that there is no basar b'chalav for a basar for behema Torah and chalav tmeah, right? Then you don't actually have to worry about chanan, because there's no rabbinic isor of basar b'chalav. However, if you told chanan only for those things, then it does make a difference. So the Bach is saying that Torah actually got it right, because the Torah only holds chanan for basar b'chalav. So here it would make a difference. But once again, the Shach hits back and says no. The Beit Yosef got it right. He says, first of all, we don't find anywhere in poskim or Shas where we say there is a derabanan isor of basar b'chalav with behema tmeya and chalav Torah, or the reverse. And furthermore, there's actually a nafkamina. And you don't need, there's another nafkamina which you don't even have to use that recourse, and that's in the case of lach belach, where in a hefsed meruba case, you can ignore chanan, right? But here you still have to apply it. And then the Shach also says, "Ugitcha parambam sham aval ma inyan ligzor shebasar behema Torah b'chalav tmeya o ipcha yasar mishum basar b'chalav tahabalav hachi lech lemechas lemidi kevan delav hachi yasor mishum basar o chalav tmeya bezehir nevanat kavanat Rabbi Yosef." And he quotes the Rambam, which I don't think I brought it here. Basically, there's actually an issue of Bal Tosif if you extend basar b'chalav to a kosher animal and a non-kosher milk. So that's sort of the first section of the Beit Yosef Shulchan Aruch. Does anybody have any questions before we move on sort of to the next section?
Wait, could you just tell me what you how did you leave off that there is or isn't chanan by basar behema tameya and chalav tahora?
According to the Shulchan Aruch, according to the Shulchan Aruch, it's a non. So according to the Shulchan Aruch, since we're saying there is no basar b'chalav isor there, then chanan wouldn't apply.
But in the Shach,
and the Shach agrees. Well, sorry, the Shach agrees according to the Shulchan Aruch. The Shach doesn't agree according to the Ramah, because the Shach also holds Shar Isurim.
mm-hmm.
Joel, you have a question?
Yeah, I'm actually curious about the Rambam's language here of what
Right.
he's like. There's no need to make a gezerah, essentially what he's saying, because we're already not going to eat this meat. But like, why does he think there's a gezerah on oaf and chalav, right? Presumably it's because you're going to come to eat basar bechalav, right? So why wouldn't you make the same claim here? Like, if because you're never going to touch basar behema, but basar tmeah, so you don't do it.
I think that's what it really is. I think like you already know you are not supposed to touch tmeah meat. you're allowed to touch oaf meat.
Mhm.
And again, because he's not discussing oaf tmeah, he's talking oaf tahor,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, of course.
Yeah, I think that's what's at play.
Yeah.
And
I
we're
mean,
gonna see. Yeah, go ahead.
you could imagine someone saying, well, coming back and saying, well, since you're permitted to cook them together, maybe you can, be a fry cook at a restaurant that cooks, we won't get into like nevela meat. We'll get into like, pig and milk or something like that. I don't know if that's, so maybe there would be a concern that you'll then go one step further or something like that. But, not one step with that further. You're like, oh, I cook pig and milk all the time. Why can't I cook cow and milk? Or something like, it's, I could imagine that is a pushback on the Rambam. So,
right. Yeah, I think it is a fair pushback. And then I guess we get into the context of like, we're not trying to deal with sinners here. Right.
Fair.
Like if you like want to get around the system, you can get around the system. But like we're assuming people are trying to do it correctly. And then of course the Shach brings other arguments. Like we actually don't see an explicit statement anywhere that's at play.
Yeah. But Chal of an oath looks like imitates the Dioraisa.
Yeah.
So. As opposed to a formal gezerah, which might lead you intellectually. Here you're cooking, just like Isaac was saying that he's ready to open the fried chicken with it. I saw in the chat. Then you're like really doing it.
Rav Lennis too. Someone pointed out to me recently that if you think about in their world, it wasn't like chicken they were talking about. They're talking about pigeons and doves and quail, stuff that actually looks a lot more like meat too, right? That it's we always think about, because people always say, well, chicken doesn't look like cow.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. So this next section, I'm just going to do on the outside because we got a lot to do. So this shach right here is on this second, this portion right here of mutar regarding chaya v'ov, basar chaya v'ov, afilu b'chalav Torah, mutar b'bishul b'hana'ah, v'af b'achila eno oser ela midirabanan. And the shach sort of brings in this machloket where even though the Shulchan Aruch paskins that bishul and hana'ah are mutar lagamre for chaya and oaf, the Ma'ari actually says that's not true. And same thing with the Marshal and the Bach. They actually say that basar chaya v'of b'chalav is asur mid'oraita, which is kind of a very extreme opinion and sort of undercuts a lot of what we actually learned in Rav Nachum's shiur. Obviously, the halacha doesn't go by them. And then the shach that you see on your screen right here, basically a defense of the Shulchan Aruch. And in the big proof that all those folks who say, the big proof that all the folks who say that the right to bring is that there is there's a Tosfot that seems to indicate that you shouldn't eat milk, even on a d'oraita level. You shouldn't eat oaf with gvina. And what he basically ends up saying is that's actually only talking about not eating dairy right after meat. As opposed to actually like some d'oraita prohibition. But I don't really want to spend so much time with it because the bottom line is the halacha follows the Shulchan Aruch in this one. But there are deo and the Marshal.
Right. What I see, in other words, that the question is, why do we have to wait 6 hours after chicken if chicken is anyway d'Rabbanan and waiting is also d'Rabbanan? Like, isn't it double d'Rabbanan? That's kind of the thought. But really, lo plug. In other words, they just included chicken as meat.
Right. So that's the shach's response, as opposed to the Marshal and the Bach, who are like, no, actually, this is an indication of something greater.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So then we're going to get to I'm doing terribly on time. I'm so sorry. And then, so now we're going to get to the very end of the Shulchan Aruch. We even get to the Ramah where he says, "Aval dagim v'chagevim ein b'hem yisor afilu d'Rabbanan."
You can take your time because Yavni's not going to be here, and you can take his time. So if you need a little more time, you can go.
All right. So I will need a little bit more time, but I'll still try to go speed. So he says
No,
that.
don't. Take your time. Take your
All
time.
right. So he says that fish and locusts, there's no isor at all, even derabanan. And this goes back to a Mishnah in Chulin. Kol basar asor levashel b'chalav, chutz mi basar dagim b'chagavim. So all meat is forbidden to be cooked with milk, except for the meat of fish, I should say the flesh of fish and locust. That's the next siman, and it's forbidden to bring them up on the table with cheese, except for the flesh of fish and locusts. And the Beit Yosef, however, says "Mikol keom ein lechol b'chalav imnei hasakana kemo shenitba'er b'sefer Orachaim." Siman Kuf, that should probably Siman or Chaim Siman Kuf Ein Gimel. So he says something kind of astonishing here, that he says, it's not forbidden. This isn't the Beit Yosef, so meaning this they're not making
Everybody. This is one thing you should
everyone
definitely
freaks
remember.
out. Right. So everyone freaks out. So again, this didn't make it into the Shulchan Aruch, but he sort of, in this offhand comment, says that it's forbidden to eat fish with cheese, with milk, and everyone freaks out because the siman that he's referring to says not milk, it says meat.
Right. As he says, and look in Sefer Archaim Siman Kuf Ayin Gimel, and there it's talking about meat and fish.
I don't know if this is the source, but I know Teimanim don't eat milk and fish together.
So this very well might be the source.
I never heard that.
Right. So
Farting,
right. So
right. My sister-in-law converted to Teimani, so I eat by her a lot.
Well, there's different kinds of Teimanim also. There's some Teimanim that adopted the Shulchan Aruch.
I guess her husband's family and parents and grandparents didn't.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. So everyone freaks out about this naturally. So I think the Darchei Moshe says it best. V'lo ra'iti mimei nizarin bazeh v'gam b'orchaim siman kuvayin gimel. Minai, right? And never my entire days did I ever seem uncareful about this. And if you actually look in the siman that he refers to, Eino ela shelo lechol bebasar mishum shakana, and it's only about meat because of the danger, right? Which Rashi in the Gemara says it's sarat. Aval b'chalav shari v'ayen lekaman siman kuf tetzayin v'lachen nireh shenitarev laharav Beit Yosef basar b'chalav. So Darchei Moshe says he got confused. He meant to write milk. He meant to write meat, but he wrote milk.
This is a joke. And then, right? He mixed his milk and his meat.
Yes, the play. Yes. Exactly. And the Pirchei Tshuva, I didn't bring the whole one here, but he brings a bunch of opinions who actually do try to preserve the Beit Yosef in some way, saying, well, you can use chema, but you can't actually do like full on milk. So I'll just read what I brought here. Vayen be'beharitev, vayen b'tshuvat chinuch Beit Yosef, siman samech aleph, shemekayem divrei halavush, de'asor le'echol b'chalav mishum de chakar etzel chachmei harofim, de dafka dagim hamituganim im chema mutar le'echol. So one of the authorities that the Pirchei Tshuva brings here, he's quoting the Tshuvat Chinuch Beit Yehuda, is that actually Lavush goes with the Beit Yosef and says, I've checked with the doctors, and while it's true that butter and fish aren't going to mess you up, milk and cooked fish is actually going to mess you up. So there is real a danger. So the lavush,
but only cooking them. He's still saying bagels and lox. Bagels and lox would be fine.
Bagels and lox are fine, but cooking them is out, right? But the Darchei Moshe would not say that. Darchei Moshe would say you could cook them easily.
Right.
But then he ends v'nireli deha'ina shekol lam b'vashlim gam im chalav sharei dekeven de dashu barabim. But then the pichei tshuva ends. But today the whole world cooks them with milk because that's what most people are accustomed to. And of course, we know that the whole world does not do that. As Rav Nachum said, there are Sephardim who don't cook them together. But correct me if I'm wrong. I think across the board, people are fine eating them cold together.
No,
Even now.
Sephardim will not eat it. Should not. I mean, a Sephardim follows the Shulchan Aruch would not. I mean, sorry.
No.
You said it doesn't make it into the Shulchan Aruch, but the
It does
Sephardim
not
are
make it
in,
into the Shulchan Aruch. You
the
follow the Beis Yosef.
minhag. The minhag of the Sephardim, as I know it, is that they do not eat even bagels and lox.
Wow.
Right.
What?
I mean, with cream cheese, they eat bagels and lox. Bagels
With cream cheese. Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't this all a little bit kasher though? Because we're gonna see the Gemara later in Basar B'Chalav with the whole question of kutach, right? That if you have fish that was cooked like with a meat pan, and then can you eat it with kutach or not? Right? Kutach is a milk. It sounds like they're eating fish and milk for sure in the time of the Gemara.
Yeah, that's a good question. I want to just read you you're right, it's a good question. Maybe the Beit Yosef knew better, knew more. Science advanced.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's
Let me just read you this one line. Just as one line from the Kufay and Gimel. It says, Bein basar l'dag, between meat and fish. Chovali tol, you have to wash your hands. Which is what people, sometimes drink schnapps or something. Litol, you have to wash your hands. Mishum de kashe ledavar acher, because it's dangerous for another thing. I think it means davar acher. I think here means leprosy. I think that's what it means.
That's what Rashi says to Rat on the Gemara. Yeah.
Yeah. So v'chamira sakana mi isura, and we should be more careful about a sakana than an isur. So this is sakana of. That's why you have to wash your hands between fish and meat.
But not between fish and dairy, according to
Right.
Moshe.
Right. And not between chicken and dairy, according to the Rambam.
Right.
But so are you talking, Nachum, are you talking about what is actually done?
I just read a seed from the Shulchan Aruch. Yeah.
Many people wash.
Do wash.
Yeah.
Well,
and Tamei Chachamim is even if they have the schnapps, then they wash. But they do it without a bracha. It's just to
clean your hands.
In a very loose way.
I mean, I think that if we use fork, I don't recall ever really washing myself. What I usually do is just if I have a different plate. And then I think I rely on the fact that there's a silverware that I'm using. I'm not touching the fish with my hands. But if I would touch the fish with my hands, then I certainly would wash. Because anyway, it would be sticky. Sometimes with fish, you have to use your hands because there's like bones. You have to get out a bone or something.
Yeah.
All right. You did what you wanted to do, Noam?
There's one more piece that I want to do. That's in the
All right. So let's do it after the break.
Okay, send
it. We'll start again with Noam.
Great. So this shouldn't take too long. So it's just this last comment of the Ramah. And here it's like, you all see it? Great. So here it's about like what we're talking about, and it's also like some meta principles as to whether we are concerned for Marit Ayin in the Rabbanan Isurim. So he writes, "V'nagula so chalav mishukadim umanechim ba basar of ho'il ve'eno rak midirabanan. Aval basar be'ema yesh laniach etzel hachalav shekadim mishu marit ha'ayin kemoshin ba'er la'el siman samech lav linyan dam." So, and we're accustomed that to place to make almond milk, and when you're serving it with chicken, to place like some almonds actually next to it, and that's only asur midrabanan because it's only asur midrabanan. But when you're using the almond milk to mix with actual meat, then you definitely have to place the almond milk by it because of Marit Ayin. And he explains this. So this is like a very live question because alternate milks are like obviously very, very in right now. And I have a teacher who said that when like non-dairy creamer came out, like whenever non-dairy creamer came out years ago, that a lot of the catering halls didn't ever want to put it out because of this issue. And then they initially good to put it out, but it had to be in like the ugly, like the carton that it came in to act as sort of as at a heck air, right? Exactly. So Joel's pointing it out. And now, depending on the caterer, they're willing to dispense with
Right.
that heck air because everyone knows that that's kosher caterer. They're not serving real milk.
So Noam, I don't know if was your rabbi Rav Moshe Feinstein,
He was not.
because Rav Moshe Feinstein has a tshuva where he says in his day, which is like in the 50s, when it came out, you should keep it in the carton. And there are those that say that today, of course, we don't have to do that because it's everybody knows. Although, everybody knows, although it's kind of like yichud. Just to keep everybody honest, it's probably better to continue that because, somebody can make a mistake. It's actually happened to me that not so bad, but at a wedding or at a party or something, somebody served those little, in Israel, they have these little squares of ice cream that are covered with chocolate. And there's two versions of it, one that's milkich and one that's parv. And they look exactly the same and they taste, pretty much the same because even the milkich one has very little milk in it. And, because he didn't have the carton out, he made a mistake and he served after a fleishik meal, the milkich ones. So it could be, even though nobody does it, it could be a good idea anyway to keep it in the carton just to make sure that nobody is, by mistake, putting out real milk.
Right. Yeah, no, my teacher was not Rav Moshe. I think Rav Moshe died before I was born. But clearly,
Yeah, I
cool.
was just pulling your leg.
Yeah, totally good. So, any event, it seems based on this comment by the Ramah that for rabbinic isurim, we actually don't need to be so concerned with Marit Ayin because that's the case. That's the case of the oath. And the Siman that the Ramah refers us to is this case of the Shulchan Aruch with the fish blood, which it's actually permitted to eat. There's no isur there. But he writes that if the Shulchan Aruch writes that if it collects into like you don't have the fish next to you basically, and you're sort of just drinking it out of a glass, then you need some sort of heker. Like it has scales, and only then it's permitted. And sort of the distinction that we can draw out from this case, in this case, is that here we're dealing with rabbinic isur, in which case you don't need a heker. But here with a dam dagim, like someone might say, oh, he's drinking bona fide animal blood. So it's sort of like Deoraita level. So there's Marit Ayin. The Shach disagrees with the Ramah, and he says that yes, it's true we are only dealing with rabbinic ones, but rabbinic isur, but he quotes the Maharshal and says actually that even the dam and the chalav case are totally comparable, and that even the case of oath with chalav shkedim, there's reason to be concerned. There's a Marit Ayin issue, and you would need to bring the heker as well. So the Shach rules against the Ramah in that case. And then there's.
Did you notice the case of Purim?
Yes, that was a custom during Purim to drink fish milk, fish blood.
No, I think the custom was to serve chicken and milk.
Oh, chicken and milk.
Chicken in almond milk.
In almond milk, got it.
And then they would leave some almonds in the milk so that you'd know it was almond milk.
Got it. So that's sort of the proof that you would then need to do it. And there's this interesting Beit Yosef from a totally different context, which seems to distinguish between Marit Ayin cases, like when you're behind closed doors, and issues when you're out in the open, which is logical, I guess, because there's no one around to see you. Though I guess you're supposed to act when you're inside the same way as you're supposed to act when you're outside. And I think this is what is sort of motivating the Taz to say what he says, where he affirms what the Ramah says, that like actually the Ramah's right, the minhag has spread that with oaf, you don't need to put out the almonds. Nevertheless, at least before the fact, you should put them out, except when there's no, but even when there's no shadim, you can eat it. But then he continues and says, even with where is it? Oh, he says at the end that even with bona fide actual beef, it's actually okay if you don't have it as well, which is a little bit more expansive than the Ramah. So he's both more prohibitive
In other words,
and more lenient.
I mean, can you distinguish for me this case, based on what you just said now, that you don't even with meat, you wouldn't have to do anything with bona fide beef. So can you distinguish between this kind of Marit Ayin and the classic Marit Ayin? And why we should be more makel here?
The classic Marit Ayin being what? You go into McDonald's with a kippah on?
Let's say, for example, yeah.
Right. So I think in the case, in that case, for example, right, you were actually entering a place of Isur, right? And I think here we are dealing with a kosher kitchen or a kosher caterer or whatever the case is. So the presumption is that people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And the reason they didn't put out almonds is not because we're dealing with because we're dealing with cow milk. It's because they didn't have almonds to put out. I think that would be the distinction. The environment in this case is important.
Okay, I think you're right. I think you're totally right. That, in other words, we have a setting. The setting seems fine. Marit Ayin is usually doing something that looks bad because the setting is bad. But I think there's also another factor, which is that here it's sort of weird that we're undoing Marit Ayin by an act. In other words, is the act usher or not? Is the normal question. The normal question is nobody ever says you can go into a McDonald's if you have a sign saying on your back that says I'm using the toilet only. In other words, here is a kind of weird thing that if the act is really usher, then who says you're allowed to make a siman that makes it ad mutter all of a sudden? It must be the act really is mutter in the first place, and the siman is really just a sort of a chumrah, because like you said, because the setting shows obviously I'm not doing something that necessarily is wrong. It's just your interpretation of the circumstance. But there the setting seems like more likely to be wrong. So I'm just saying that I think that the opinion that you quoted last has a certain skepticism of the efficacy of putting up the almonds in the first place. Because who says that's a valid method? We never saw that anywhere in Shas that that's a thing. So who says you really need it?
But Nahum, isn't there, or maybe Noam, there's also an opinion that thinks you can't add to Marit Ayin, right? If it's not in the Gemara, you can't add cases to it, right? And we never see this case in the Gemara of like almond milk and
right. That's even a stronger argument. Yeah. But I'm just pointing out that there's a conceptual difference here that we have an addition to it to undo Marit Ayin. That's like a new concept, and therefore may not be really valid. But what you're saying is also right. Yeah, there's maybe we only have those cases. By the way, I don't know if going into a McDonald's necessarily, even though it's a classic case, maybe you really are going to go to the bathroom. I don't know. It's a complicated question. All right. You anything more you want to say, Noam?
I am good to go.
Okay, so now we're up to Josh. Thank you very much, Noam. You did an excellent job. Very interesting topics.
Right. I have a shita about going into, say, McDonald's for the bathroom.
Yeah.
Is that there's a mitzvah ladun lekaf zchut. Right?
Giving
So
other people the opportunity.
Everyone has to say, yeah, he must be doing the right thing. right? Giving an
Right.
opportunity.
Well, it's more problematic if you go into a non-kosher Dunkin' Donuts, because then you have a problem, because you really, people will think maybe it is. They see people with kippahs, you know. Although I was once with Adin Steinsaltz and we went into the 7-Eleven to get a coffee. So I don't know, they serve, maybe they don't, I mean, it's seven, I mean, you're allowed to, I mean, again, it's a question of the perush. You go into a place that seems to have mutter and other things in it. I mean, every supermarket in America that serves kosher food also has non-kosher food, but doesn't, it's a question of degrees. How likely is it that what you're doing, is it 50-50 that you're doing something permitted? So then for sure you can do it. If it's 95% usser, then and only a small chance that maybe that's, what I mean? It's a question of percentages, really. How likely is your act to be determined to be forbidden?
I always thought the more classic case at McDonald's is if I'm eating my kosher food wrapped in aluminum foil with my friend who's sitting at McDonald's. Then
Yeah,
somebody
I
would see
think,
me eat, then somebody would see me eating there, and I'm actually not eating anything treif, but who's to know? You see a guy with a kippah eating in a McDonald's.
I like your example.
I think,
I think you
I
could
think
go to
when I was in
McDonald's.
Pardes, I think that was the example Tzvi Wolf gave when he taught us Mari Sain.
I like that example. In other words, you're really doing something that anybody looking at you would think is usser. But just going to a McDonald's to use the bathroom, I don't think that's prohibited. Even to order a soda.
When I was a child, the first McDonald's opened up in Chicago. There was you could get for 11 cents a small bag of fries and a small Coke. And the fries were done in 100% guaranteed vegetable oil. And all over the city, because the other Jewish imperative is to get a bargain. There were kids doing this. My brother Steve was a leader in that. Somewhat 45 years later, he was the lawyer that defended McDonald's as they were a Hindu group, said that actually the 100% vegetable oil had a good deal of non-vegetable oil. And he won, but he never ate. He never let his kids eat the fries again because the Hindus were right. My brother was just a fancy lawyer.
Malcolm Gladwell had a whole podcast about this, how the fries at McDonald's today are not nearly as good as they were
Well,
about when you're talking about Revlandis, because they don't have the pig schmaltz that they're
Right.
yeah.
well,
Right.
I have to predate you because that's a lot of my, just like before Malcolm Gladwell was Julia Childs. And she said that. She already said way back that, yeah, she doesn't like McDonald's fries. They used to use, animal fat, and now they use vegetable fat, and they're not as crispy. And I always thought it was funny because here she is like a connoisseur of food, and she is saying, what are the good French ribs? In other words, she goes to McDonald's. But anyway, yeah. So they definitely don't eat French fries at McDonald's. Even now they use vegetable oil, but they also fry, chicken McNuggets in the same oil. Okay, Josh.
So I'll try and do Sifim Dalet and Hey. And it kind of continues, at least Dalet continues with the issue of Marit Ayin. And it comes up in continuation from what Noam was teaching of Marit Ayin issues. The Beit Yosef remembers a tshuva of the Rashba about mother's milk, about breast milk. And he quotes it there, and that comes into the Shulchan Aruch. So I think, as usual, we'll look at the sources and work backwards and forwards there. So the Shulchan Aruch brings very clearly, אסור לבשל בחלב אישה מפני מראית עין, ואם נפל לתוך התבשיל, בטל ואין צריך שיעור. So you can't cook in human milk, which theoretically is kosher, like human blood, because of marit ayin, because it looks incorrect. And if it fell into a tavshil accidentally, then it's batil immediately, and it doesn't matter how much of it fell in. So if we kind of bounce back to the Rashba, where it's all coming from, there's some interesting stuff there. And I think we could read the tshuva itself. Rashba has this tshuva that basically asks that. Shalta basar b'chalav isha mahu. And you have this sheila, which is all, it's quite complicated. Sorry, my Spirit to Omer app is nudging me. Snooze. Basar b'chalav isha. Okay, so what do we do about this? And the question that kind of brings a few different options, and Rashba spends his time showing why the question is a bad question. But he just says at the beginning, "Mistabra she'asur levashlo, asur levashlo. Kol sheken lo'achlo, kol shenikar bo me'oto, kol shenikar bo." Yeah, so you can't cook with it, much more so you can't eat with it. And then he says this is similar to the dam dagim that Noam was talking about. Umidam shel gabei hakikar shamru she.
Can you point to where you're reading?
Do you see the tshuva?
Yeah, I see that. No, I just exactly the word.
Okay, so just before the underlined bit. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now this is a bit where I kind of I'm not 100% confident of my understanding here. So if anyone else wants to correct me, very, very welcome. But here he quotes the Mishnah that we looked at before about basar behemat Torah with chalav tmeah and basar tmeah with chalav Torah. And he says there when they said it's mutar, lo dibur ela b'chiyuv achilato ובשולו, שאין באלו חיוב כלל, לא מדברי תורה ולא מדברי סופרים. אבל באיסור מראית העין לא דיברו. Okay, so there when they said it's mutar, they're only talking on the level of chiyuv, but they didn't bring in the level of maraita ayin. Okay, am I reading that right? Yeah, I see nods. Because the Rama makes a big deal of this kol sheken, like why are we saying asur alav isha? It should be kol sheken for chalav behemat teora im chalav tameh and like those cases. But it seems the Rashba does say that. It does say it's the same halacha. And if I understood Rabbi Akiva Eger correctly, then he's saying that the Rama didn't see this tshuva, and he was just seeing he just saw Torah Habayit.
I'm not sure exactly what you mean, but if I can see a culture case sort of, because by the milk of a woman, they're both mutter items, and so cooking it together is less forbidden looking than cooking meat of a treifa animal in milk, which seems worse, because you're mitasek, you're touching, you're dealing with totally treif things.
You could say though that the with behemat tamea that it's unlikely for you to be doing that in the first place though, so there's no need to have
No,
some
but
sort of gzera.
no, there's no need for a gazera. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the question was,
Yeah.
but as far as
But-
Marit
So
Ayin, I
that's
see a
what
greater
Tifaz
Marit
is going to
Ayin.
say.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It just seems that the Rama is saying why
Well, show
didn't
us-
the Rashba also say it's asur?
Can you show us the Ramah again?
Yeah. אוקיי, זה מה. ונראה לפי זה, דכל שכן, זה אסור לבשל לכתחילה בחלב. Wait, am I still sharing?
No, it's the share stop.
Everything's at the top of the screen. בחלב טמאה או בשר טמא בחלב טהור.
Right. In other words, it's more of a Marit Ayin.
Right, but the Rashba also says that. There shouldn't be dat atzmo.
Uh-huh. The Ramad, well, he didn't say Kol Shekin. I don't think the Rashba said Kol Shekin.
Right, the Rashba just says also, huadin.
Yeah. You're
So
saying,
I just,
yeah.
I mean, the Rashba brings in a kind of an important issue here about Maritayan, which is maybe worth looking at. So he says to the questioner, he says, Od raiti biktavecha, did you see here, this od? שאמרת וזה לשונך, אבן הבשר חיה חשו למראית עין ואסרוהו, אכן הבשר חיה חשו למראית עין ואסרוהו עם החלב מדברי סופרים. עד כאן. Okay, so the questioner said something about they were worried about Marit Ayin, so they made a rabbinic gzera against it. והלשון הזה אינו מחובר. You can't speak like that. אפילו לפי מה שפוסק דחיה כעוף ושניהם מדברי סופרים, לא משום מראית העין אסור, אלא משום גזרה. כלומר גזרה, אלו עטו בשר בהמה. Yes, when they were worried about, when they forbade basar chaya with milk, they forbade that lest you come to do something forbidden, right? Which is different to Maritayin. Gzera is different to Maritayin. והפרש גדול יש בין מה שאסור משום גזרה, בין מה שאיסורו משום מראית. They're two completely different things, and they have different dinim. כי מה שאיסורו משום מראית העין, כל שיש בו היכר אינו נאסר. If it's the Marit Ayin case, then you can get around it by making it
clear.
Make it known to everyone that you're not doing a forbidden thing. And then the prohibition completely drops. כדם דגים שכנסון בזמן שיש בו קשקשים מותר. It's like fish blood. If there's fish scales in it, then they're permitted. And without fish scales, it's forbidden because of Marit Ayin. And so as soon as you have a heker, the prohibition disappears. And so וכאן אינו אוסר תערובת, וכן אינו אוסר תערובת, וכן אם הוא בקום מכוסה, כדם על השיניים מוצצו ואוכלו. So Marit Ayin prohibitions, they don't make a mixture prohibited, because once it's in the mixture, it's not a Marit Ayin issue anymore. And if it's hidden, like blood that's already in your mouth, if you have a bleeding gum, it's not Marit Ayin. You just swallow it and it's okay. ואילו בשר עוף בחלב, בשר חיה בחלב, ואפילו למאן דאמר בשר חיה מדברי סופרים, So all these things which have a gzera against them, which are forbidden rabbinically, אסור להעלותם עם הגבינה לשולחן, ואוסרים תערובתן, ובאו שיעור. So they're forbidden, and you treat them as a forbidden thing, and then we have all these mechanisms of how we treat forbidden things, like batel b'shishim, or you don't put it on the table with cheese. Even if it's hidden in your mouth, for some reason you had chicken in your mouth and milk in your mouth, you can't swallow it because it's not a maritain issue, it's a gzera issue. So that's, I think he says it most explicitly, the difference between maritain and everything else.
Very interesting, Rashba. Now, this is distinguishing between behema tamea, which would be mutter to cook, except because of maris ayin, and chayav ov, which actually would be stricter, that would be forbidden to cook, even if it was clear what you were doing. Is that correct?
Say that again. I'm sorry.
That by behema tamea, it would be mutter to cook it, except because of maris ayin. But if it was somehow clear to everybody that it was behema tamea in chalav, then it would be permitted. But by chayav ov is a gezerah. It's always prohibited. Dafka because it's more mutter. Because naturally chayav ov in milk would be permitted, therefore there's a gezerah and you can never do it now. But by behema tamea in milk, you could do it actually, as long as it wasn't being maradayin, as long as it was clear what you're doing.
Right, and that's kind of where the Achronim take it, in terms of like how to understand the maradayin issue there. Again, there's a kind of a confusion that I haven't quite clarified in terms of it seems that they don't see the Rashba as saying that that's a maradayin issue. Okay,
So what's a maradayin issue?
That basar tameh and chalav tahor, or basar tahor and chalav tameh. Okay. So the Taz and the Shach solve that in different ways. Again, I'm not so sure where the problem is. It seems that the Rashba just says it. But it's worth looking at the solutions that they give. I look at the Taz. I think we have time for that. Okay. So you see the bit I circled, squared. נראה לעניות דעתי דאין זה קל וחומר, דנראה דלא גזרו משום מראית עין, אלא במידי תקשר לאכילה כל אחד לחוד. Okay? So he's saying there's no such things as a gzera of marit ayin, and this is, I think, Joel is saying something like this. You don't talk about marit ayin in issues where it's forbidden for other reasons, right? Marit ayin is only when you have two things which are edible, which are permissible, then there's a marit ayin issue of seemingly eating them together. But if we're talking about pig meat and milk, yeah, then there's no marit ayin issue of cooking them together, because everyone knows that you're not going to be eating it.
It's very strange what he's saying, because he's exactly arguing on the Rashba. He's saying there is such a thing as gozer of marit ayin. So it comes. There is such a time. In other words, there's two types of marit ayin. One is a type of marit ayin which they were not gozer, which is just you're doing some weird thing that looks like you're eating a hamburger in a McDonald's, but it's your own hamburger. So there was no gezerah. That's just usher because of marit ayin. But then there's another thing, which is that they were oser certain specific acts because of Marit Ayin. And those things are like drinking blood, and therefore you have to have scales in the blood, or certain specific things. And that's like what Joel was saying, that there's only the list that the Gemara says. And that's a gezerah. So now the question is there a gezerah specifically on, there's a gezerah specifically on what? On behemoth tamea and milk? I don't think, is he saying that?
Well, we have a Mishnah that says it's mutar, the bishul and hana,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
And
but
the Rama comes and says asur lechatchila, the vashel, mikol sheken, right?
Is he saying that there's a gezerah on, let's say, cooking almond milk with chicken or with meat, and therefore you have to have almonds in it? And that's actually a gezerah, and it's not going to help if the circumstances are clear. You have to put almonds in that. This is an actual gezerah.
it's a gezerah of Marit Ayin, though. It's like a very
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's a gezerah of Marit Ayin, but it's actually has the status of gezerah in the sense that it's always going to be usher unless you do the things that they told you to do, which is put almonds in the milk or put scales in the blood.
Right.
I mean, that's what it sounds like he said there.
I'm not sure. What would you do for behemoth tamea? Like you.
I don't know. No, it may not be a gezerah there.
Yeah. Oh, you're right. It wouldn't be. It's.
There may not be a gezerah of Marit Ayin there,
Right.
and that's what he's saying, I think.
That is,
Saying,
he's gonna
exactly.
he's gonna back off of it, not for a good reason other than the Rama said so. Essentially, that's a
Right.
good reason. But yeah. So.
No, so first he's more lenient and he's more strict than the Rama. So he says, נראה לנו דאין זה קל וחומר, דנראה לא גזרו משום מראית עין, אלא באמת תקשר לאכילה כל אחד לחוד. Okay, only things which could be eaten have a gzera of מראית עין. דאז דומה לבשר טהור וחלב טהור.
Right, like the almond milk and the beef and the chicken.
Right. What's that? Mihu?
I think maybe high timer.
I think it was mishum hachi. I think.
Oh, mishum
hachi.
Okay, either way.
בבישול עם חלב שקדים צריך להניח שם שקדים. That's what we had before, לכתחילה. ובחלב אישה, and that's what we have here, שגם כן מותר כל שפירש ממנה. So חלב אישה in theory is permitted by itself, and meat is permitted by itself. Therefore, there's a Marit Ayin gzera of cooking them together. על כן אסור לבשל עם בשר משום מראית עין, מה שאין כן, באם החלב טמא או בשר טמא, אין דומה לבשר בחלב של טהורים. So it just doesn't, if either the meat or the milk is not kosher, it doesn't look like you're cooking meat and milk together. It's a bit strange. But he says it just looks different.
Yeah, I think you almost have to understand Marit Ayin not as what you see, like visibly, but like it is a different kind of like, to you as an experience of some sort, right? It's very different.
Basar b'chalav essentially is taking too much of things and making an isser. And you're taking too much of things here. But taking treif meat is clearly a different thing. It's clear to everybody that it's different. So therefore, it's not, there's no gezerah of Marit Ayin.
Right. So here, Rav Nachum, they seem to be collapsing the distinction that you were trying to make beforehand, right?
No. Why? Okay, go ahead. Why?
Because he levels it out entirely, meaning he only talks about making a gezerah of Marit Ayin, right? There's no mention of another type of Marit Ayin.
I know. Well, that's what I'm pushing that into. He never mentioned it anywhere. But we know that there's such a concept of, I mean, what is he going to say about this? Like, they didn't make a gezerah that you can't go into a McDonald's and eat your hamburger. That's a different. I'm assuming that he is modeh to that kind of a thing, that kind of a Marit Ayin.
I guess you have to
and that's why I said there's two kinds. Unless he's saying all Marit Ayin is just a gezerah,
Right.
That,
I guess you sort of have to think of the other type of Marit Ayin as sort of like Uvdin Dechol for Shabbat, right? Like, something might be mutar, like from a systematic perspective, from a technical perspective, but it's Uvdin Dechol, so it's therefore
right.
forbidden,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? But in this Marit Ayin works in that same way. Right. It's nothing. There's nothing rabbinically prohibited per se. There's no
Well, this
gezerah.
right, exactly. No, exactly. This two. That's what I was saying. That was exactly my point. There's two things going on. Just like I'm sticking with what the Rashba says. I'm fixing this. I'm saying this doesn't contradict the Rashba. The Rashba said that you can't. It doesn't make sense to say the gazru marit ayin on a certain case. The rabbis don't. He said the rabbis never make a gezerah of marit ayin. Either it is marit ayin or it isn't marit ayin. You don't need to make a gezerah of marit ayin. Either it looks bad or it doesn't look bad. And what he's saying is, what I think the Shach, this is the Shach, yeah?
Taz.
Taz. So I think what Taz is saying is that, yes, Rashba, you're correct. You don't make a gezerah, except there are some cases where you do. In other words, there is such a concept, as the Rashba is saying, of just maridayin. It just is maridayin, it looks bad. But then there are certain specific cases that the Gemara lists that they made a gezerah of maridayin on a specific act, and that includes things that, and therefore it wouldn't matter if it's chadrei chadarim. You have to do exactly what they're saying, to do, which is put almonds in your milk. And they never made that gezerah on behema, tameya, and chalav. But maybe that would also be usher. In other words, maybe that would also be usher because of the other kind of maridayin. If you do it in a certain way, that it looks like you're doing something prohibited.
I think
Marasayan, just to mention, Marasayan, even though it's a drabanan issue, has a very strong shaykhs to diraisa. There's two types of reasons for Marasayan. One is that you lead someone to an Isur, and that's lifnei iver, the pasuk there. And the other type of Marasayan is that they think badly of you. V'yisam nikiyim lifnei Hashem v'amo. So Marasayan, even though it's it's not just made up. Marasayan is a worry, and therefore I think they're pretty strict about it. It's a derisa concern. Anyway,
it seems systematically the Rama brings that in again and again, the Maritain issue. So maybe it has the backing. I just finish this and then go on to see if he's explaining why there's no gzera. It says Valken lo gazul sham mipnei marit ayin, kach nireh le'aniyut dati barur, ela she'en be'adi la'akel b'ma she'echmir Rama. Right. So the Rama says don't cook tamei meat in milk, even though I think that's not a marit ayin issue. What can I do? The Rama said. And then he goes on to be more strict, and he says, yes, actually, also chicken in mother's milk and human milk should also be forbidden because of the same concepts.
Any milk, chicken in b'chalav, isn't it b'chalav aim? But yeah.
Maybe it's chalav. Maybe it's in chalav. Beseder. Let's do hay. I think we can do that in time. In seconds. Okay. We're going to look at the Torah and Beit Yosef here. And we have we have this idea of eggs inside chickens. Okay, it's not an everyday occurrence in our world, but it's worth learning Torah Lishma. So if you, and this is where Tikva's video made everything clear. Right? Tikva sent out a video. Are you there?
Mm-hmm.
Toda. That changed everything for me, and I learned a lot about egg production. And so we're looking at chickens that kind of lay eggs every day, right? And if you shecht a egg-laying chicken, there are chances that there's going to be an egg somewhere along that process of production inside. And really, there's like a 24-hour slide of going from the ovaries, where it's just a yolk, until it builds up with the whites, and then a soft shell and a hard shell. So depending on where it is in that process, there's a question of whether that egg is an egg and parfait, or whether that egg is actually still meat in some way, and then you wouldn't be allowed to eat it with milk. So here, this ביצים נמצאים בעופות מותרים, I'm reading from the tool, מותרים לאוכלם בחלב, במה דברים אמורים שהן גמורות, אבל אם אינן גמורות, הבו כבשר העוף עצמו. Okay, so I think that's a beraita from Chuli, no, from Beitza. And he's ruling according to the Tanakama there that says if the egg is gamur in some way, then it's no longer basar, it's now an egg. So then you have to try and understand, what does a finished egg look like? What's a gamur egg? And you basically have 5 different shitot, and we have 5 minutes to list them. So the Rashba says, Kol sheyesh bo chelbon v'chelmon, af al pi shehu me'oreh begidin, harei ze gemura. If it has the yolk, what do you say in English? The white of the egg?
Yeah. Yeah, the egg white.
Okay. Egg white.
Or the ablumen, I think was the word.
Ablumen.
Yeah.
So if
That was the word in the
yolk
video.
was abluminated, then that's an egg, right? The shell isn't part of the definition of the egg, but the yolk and the white are. Even if it's covered in veins and vessels and all sorts of gut that's around there, it's still a gamur, it's still a finished product at that point. And if it doesn't have the white, then it's adain basar, it's still basar. That's the Rashba's opinion. The Beit Yosef, as is his holy way, brings in many other opinions. From the strictest, I'd say, it's the one I circled as Yesh Omrim, right? That's going to be the Rashbam, who says, Sheina Gemura ad shetigmor klipata v'titkashe. It has to have a hard shell around it. That's the Rashbam. So the most lenient is the Rashi. Piresh ביצים גמורות, אפילו בלא קליפה לבנה, אלא שהחלמון לבדו גמור. The Rashi says, even if it just has the yolk,
No. Oh, really? Chilmon. Wow.
Yeah, that itself is finished. Okay, and then it goes into a long thing of the Rosh and the
It's almost as though Rashi,
the language of Rashi.
But the language of Rashi seems to almost imply that there's no such thing as the white. In other words, the white doesn't make sense because it's too fluid. Either you have to have the membrane around it or just a yolk. But in other words, it can't be that you have the white also, because the white is not has no border. Where would the end of it be? You know what I mean? Like he says, he
Right, the
distinguishes
Rashba
between
requires the
klipa.
beginning of it.
He distinguishes between two cases which are either extreme. Below klipa, below what does he mean below klipa livana? He means the shell, right? Afilu without its shell, ella chelmon levado, but only it has the yolk. In other words, what about the middle case where it has the white? That doesn't seem relevant to Rashi because there's no, how would you define that edge? There's no, you need some limiting factor. You need an edge, either a shell, or,
He, like later, the Beit Yosef, he brings, you see where I have Midivei Rabbeinu, he says the two, there's like a blue dot here. Pirsha min ha'eshkol askinan. Ela beshkvar pirsha min ha'eshkol askinan. So that's in that video, he had like a whole bunch of little yolks, and one at a time they come off and they go down the tube. Okay, so he's saying like as soon as that happens, that's enough. That's enough for it to be called gamul.
according to
that's the Rashi, but it's kind of the Rosh understanding Rashi. Okay, just a reminder. And then there's some middle opinions. The Orchot Chaim says, yeah, it does have to have a shell, but it can be a klipa daka. It doesn't have. It can be klipa raka. It can be like a soft shell, just like the very beginning of the shell. That's enough to call it a shell.
membrane.
A membrane. And Rabbeinu Yonatan says something similar there. And maybe just to cut to the chase, the Shulchan Aruch paskins according to the Rashba. Yes, it has to have a yolk and a white. That's the rule. And he adds on to that we're only like, even if it doesn't have a yolk and a white, we're only talking about eating it with milk itself, but you don't have to wait any amount of time afterwards to eat milk. Maybe it's also.
I mean, it's not considered meat, even if it's just a yolk.
Right, because even if it was considered meat, it's chicken meat, and chicken meat is already the Rabbanan. So you have this kind of safek chicken.
Interesting. Well, we certainly have Rashi, right?
Right. They're always relying Rashi. So that was my ramblings. I hope it was helpful to someone.
Yeah, very interesting. I enjoyed it. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Noam. Thank you, Josh. And next week, hopefully we'll finish everything. So bear that in mind. Anyway, yes, Yesher koach to everybody. Shavua tov.
Laila Tov.
Laila tov.
Thank you.
Yeah.